Okay, so we've done power rankings and top fives and stuff in the past, but this is going to be a little bit of a different one. This is going to be power rankings, but we're going to power rank all of the teams based off of their tank lines alone. Now, some teams have more comprehensive tank lines than others, so we will see the quality of the tank lines, and then we will see and try and determine who's the worst, who's the best, and where everyone is at in terms of that specific role. Now, we can do this with other roles. I haven't done it with supports because Boston don't have a main support right now, which is kind of meaning they are a little bit unfortunate, but we can do it with other roles as well. So, you know, if you like this sort of thing, then yeah, please do let me know in the comments below, and likes and etc. You know how YouTube works, and we can continue to move through these. But let's start off with our bottom half teams and then move through all the way to the top. I think that's a pretty good way of doing it. So, at the bottom we got Vancouver. Vancouver is Shredlock and FRD. FRD was benched on Atlanta last season. Well, that's not a great start. And Shredlock is mediocre. I think we have to. I think that's what we have to say with that. I've put Paris just above them in 19th, and the reason I put Paris just above them is because Paris have Elivote, and although Elivote didn't shine at Washington, he wasn't an old team, not gonna lie, and he's not with his usual partner Lulsish, but I do think Elivote is a good off-tank, and I think he's better than FRD, and I think, although there is the weirdness at Paris with Dunn, I think he will be able to match at least Shredlock, and that puts Paris above Vancouver for me. But when we look beyond that, and we look at 18th, I've put Boston. So, Boston, they have 3 tanks. This is the first team we come across with 3 tanks. And this is Fusions and Stand 1. So they have 2 main tanks, then they have Punk and the off-tank role. I think the main tank situation is pretty good. You got Fusions who can pull out a Roadhog, and he's got a great Rhine. But then you've got Stand 1 who's got a good Orisa and a fairly good Wrecking Ball. So I think he'll come in for Fusions at those points. But then we have Punk on the off-tank, which is just meh. I think that's what we have to say about that. Like, why? Ugh. Punk is okay, but he's not going to take this Boston team to new heights. So, yeah, it's a little bit disappointing that they didn't get an upgrade in that aspect, because if they did, they would have actually had a fairly decent tank line. But, unfortunately, they didn't. So that's why they're going to be in 18th place. In 17th place, I've put the Valiant. Our outliers in this, because we don't know what the Valiant are quite going to look like in 2021 season right now, because of their changes. Right now, they have Dreamer and Adam, which, in my opinion, puts them in the same boat as Boston. I think Dreamer is a nice and consistent main tank. I really do think that. Adam, I think, is better than Punk. I think he's better than Punk. Adam has a great track record in Australian contenders, but it is Australian contenders. So we have to take that into account, which I don't think Valiant are that good in terms of their tank line, especially with their off-tanks. I don't think they can rely on them like they could McGravy last year. I think McGravy was the much better option. Of course, the Valiant, however, could look very much different in the start of the 2021 season. So again, they're very much outliers here. They could be big movers up or down. So who knows what was going to happen to the Valiant. Then we have Atlanta. So Atlanta, oh boy. Atlanta, they stay consistent compared to last season of Gator and Hawk again, which is great for consistency, great for synergy, but I don't think it's a top tier tank line. I don't think it's a top half tank line, if I'm honest. And that's why they're down in that 16th spot, really. I don't see the quality in Gator and Hawk. I see the consistency, I don't see the quality. And I think they need not carries around them, but they need real pop-off DPS and stuff like that. And then they'll make a good team. Atlanta have been good in the past, but Gator and Hawk just doesn't seem like the combination that's going to cut it to make Atlanta a great team. Atlanta always have this ability to outdo themselves, however, so I wouldn't be surprised to see if they did do that. However, just above Atlanta, in 15th, I have put Houston. Piggy and Jangu, coming in from Talon Esports. Did okay in Korean contenders, considering Talon came over from the Pacific region. I believe Piggy was with Talon during the Pacific region times where they dominated it. They did okay. They're not standout, and they're not carry tanks, in my opinion. It's definitely other parts of the Houston Outlaws that are going to carry. The DPS for Houston are exceptional, so I really do think that's a great part for the Houston Outlaws. But in terms of the tanks alone, I don't think they're massive pop-off. And that's why I've put them just below the 14th place team, which is New York, because they've got Yakpung and Bianca. Bianca has league experience from last year, albeit very briefly, but New York did improve when Bianca came in over Hotbar last year, which I think was really, really good for New York. He looked much more consistent. Yakpung coming in, big shoes to fill when it comes to Mano, but I think Yakpung can do it. He had a decent season at O2 Blast, and the last time we saw him in the league was Toronto Defiant. And although it didn't go too well, you know, on that Toronto Defiant team was also Ivy, and he's now on this New York Excelsior team after being a great player for the Philadelphia Fusion. So we can't always take previous league experience as a determination of their quality. It can very often be determined by the team they're at. So that could be the case for Yakpung, and he did look good at O2 Blast. So I don't disagree with this New York tank line. 14th I think is fairly okay for where they are right now, considering it's a little bit of an unknown. Then in 13th we have the London Spitfire. Molvig and Haddy, they've been together for so long now. Really good tank line, dominated EU contenders last year, like dominated. And that's why I think they're gonna really do well above the likes of Boston and Paris and Vancouver, like Atlanta even, people like that. I think London's tank line is actually pretty cool. But when you start comparing it to the more higher echelons of the league tank lines, you start seeing quality and skill level come into account, and I think that's where Molvig and Haddy will start to suffer slightly when they come up against the more experienced tank lines and the more high skill tank lines in the league, which we're now starting to knock on the doors of, because the tank lines in the league are actually stacked when it comes to it. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see. Then we see in 12th Chengdu Hunters. Now Chengdu Hunters are the first team we come across that have 4 tanks. Yeah, 4 of the bloomin' things. So they have Gaga, they have Elsa, Among, and Leityoung. I'm not expecting Among and Leityoung to have too much playtime. Gaga and Elsa I think will be the tank line for Chengdu this season, and I think that's a decent tank line. I think Elsa can be a little weak at times, but I think Gaga's a great pickup for main tank. I really, really do, and I think it will make Chengdu a lot more stable. I mean, they become much less meta dependent. I got there in the end, but when you compare them again to, and they can come back to a little bit of the same issue as London, like when you compare them to the other tank lines that we're going to be looking at coming up, it's tough. It's tough to rate them higher than where they are. However, I do think there's a lot of scope for this Chengdu Hunters tank line to be very pop-off this season. If they get it right coaching, and they can be flexible through metas, I think Chengdu will be good as a team as a whole. So yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be an interesting season for Chengdu, that's for sure. At 11th, we have the Guangzhou Charge. Now, Guangzhou Charge, they suffer a bit from lopsidedness in their tank line, in my opinion. Like Krong, fantastic. Krong is fantastic. He impressed me greatly during the Next Cup. He's shown more diversity in his hero pool and is less reliant on the Sigma, which is great. Then we have Ryu and Jihan. Jihan's a good addition, ball specialist. He's got a good Orisa as well. I won't take that away from Jihan, coming in from London. And I think he deserves another chance. Is he setting the world alight? Probably not. He'll be quietly consistent, but not a massive like pop-off main tank. And Rio coming back from last year. Well, Rio was consistent for Guangzhou Charge last year, but he wasn't, again, a high echelon main tank. He wasn't up there with the Sados and the Smurfs and the Fearlesses of what we saw last year. And so it's hard to rate Guangzhou Charge's tank line solely the tank line highly. However, the team as a whole I think could do very well. The tank line, I think 11th is fairly fair compared to the rest of the tank lines in the league right now. Slap bang middle of the league we have Hangzhou Spark in 10th. Hangzhou, the other team with 4 tanks. So Spark is different because they have it split down the middle. They have 2 Korean tanks and 2 Chinese tanks. So the 2 Chinese are Guzhui and Li Ji, and then the 2 Korean tanks are Takoyaki and Benar. Benar coming in from London. Benar had a good season last season despite being on a very questionable team, shall we say? So I don't think that's a bad addition. Takoyaki is also a great young addition to the team as well. Then we look at Guzhui. Guzhui is a pioneer Winston Blair. Although the meta really hasn't been there for Guzhui recently, to see his absolute god tier tank play. If it does fall into his meta, he'll be fantastic, and I've heard very, very good things about Li Ji, the off-tank, the new Chinese off-tank for Hangzhou Spark. I think, again, very much sink or swim for this Hangzhou Spark side. This tank line could be much, much better than we expect, or it could be right around middle of the league. It depends on how they mould it as well. Will they play the two Chinese tanks together and the two Korean tanks together? Will they mix things up? Will we see Gushui and Banar and Takoyaki and Li Ji? Will we see different things run? That will be extremely interesting. And another thing they do have scope to do now as well with two off-tanks, if we end up in a double off-tank meta or a double main tank meta, Hangzhou Spark are covered. Same with Chengdu Hunters as well. So that's two big benefits for those teams. I will say that. But that's our bottom 10. Let's start our top 10. And in ninth, Philadelphia Fusion. Now, the reason I put Philadelphia Fusion here is they got rid of Fury, which I think, in my opinion, is a loss to them. I think Poco is great, don't get me wrong. I think Fury is slightly better, however. I really do think that, and I think losing Fury is a massive loss. Then out goes Sado, in comes Mano. The Philadelphia Fusion are built like... they're built very aggressive. They always have been. Funny Astro is an extremely aggressive main support, and they've always been a fairly aggressive team. Then you put Mano into the equation, who has always been a very passive off-tank. And New York Excelsior tried to mold Mano into an aggressive main tank. I should say, I said off-tank just now. Main tank. They tried to mold him into an aggressive main tank with Hopper last season, and it didn't work. Hence, they started playing Bianca again and started to settle down a bit because Mano didn't have to be as aggressive as he was. And I don't think Mano suits the aggressive style. And I feel that there is a bit of a clash of styles at the Philadelphia Fusion with this tank line. Like, Mano's aggressive, Funny Astro is passive in the support line, Poco can be aggressive. Poco's not so much of the issue, but Mano's fitting into this Philadelphia Fusion squad. He seems to stick out like a sore thumb to me. And it just doesn't sit well. And that's why I'm worried that this Philadelphia Fusion tank line is just not going to settle down properly when it comes to the season. However, again, it could work and it could end up being a lot higher. Then we have Toronto Defiant in 8th. Toronto Defiant, Beast, Michelle, Sado. Beast, sweep him aside, because if he plays, they're throwing. It should be Sado and Michelle. Sado was great in the regular season last season. He came up mighty short in the playoffs, but so did the whole of the Philadelphia Fusion, so I don't think we can really take too much away from that. And then Michelle, it was at the Seoul Dynasty last year. Yes, he was a bench player for the Seoul Dynasty, mostly, with Marvel picking up most of those off-tank duties. But Michelle, I don't think, got to demonstrate his quality at Seoul Dynasty at all. And I think this is his chance to do that at the Toronto Defiant. I don't see a reason why Sado and Michelle won't be a very good tank line. It won't be able to compete with the top tank lines in the league, but I think it's going to be a good tank line. And that's why I quite like this Toronto team. I actually quite like this Toronto team all around. And I think it's a little bit of a dark horse, especially with Aztec in that flex sport. Holy mother of God. He popped off in the contenders scene. Anyway, we have Florida Mayhem up next in 7th. This is an interesting one because Mayhem have the opposite problem to a lot of others. They have a greatly consistent off-tank in Gargoyle. Gargoyle had a great season last season. Really kind of made his name last season as a really good off-tank. Then we have a change in main tank at the Florida Mayhem. Out goes Fate, and in comes OG. So, OG, not been massively impressive yet. It could be for a few reasons. OG has spent the past 2 seasons on mixed rosters, both at the Dallas Fuel and at the Los Angeles Gladiators. This time, he's on an all-Korean roster at the Florida Mayhem, and that's why I think they may get more out of him than previous teams have been able to manage. The Florida Mayhem's success will heavily depend on OG's performance this year. It is his last shot at the league. He's surrounded by incredibly good players. Yaki, BKB, Gargoyle, Slime, and Gangnam Jin. There are some great players in that Florida Mayhem squad, and I think it's actually a better squad than it was last year. Minus the fact that the main tank, like Slime, is a massive upgrade on what we saw from Chris last year. So I think Florida Mayhem are in a good spot. It's going to hinge on OG on quite how well they do. I think they'll be consistent enough, but will they be good enough to push them all the way up? I don't know. And that's why I've rated them in 7th. Dallas Fuel in the 6th. Yes, much lower than my original power rankings, I know. Dallas Fuel, Fearless and Hanbin. So, Hanbin is nice. I like him as an off-tank. I think he can have his weaknesses, and I think he can have his off days. I still think he's a nicely consistent off-tank though, and I think he will do well for the Dallas Fuel, I should say. Fearless is great in his meta. If he's playing Reinhardt, Winston, Fearless is going to be one of the best main tanks in the league. That's without a doubt. But when we push him onto the Orisa, when we push him even more into the Wrecking Ball, Fearless starts to lose his grip on power. He starts to lose his quality. He is not the most flexible of main tanks. He is a very good main tank when it comes to his meta, but he's not the most flexible. And that's what I worry about with Dallas Fuel. Wrecking Ball has been incredibly prominent in the meta recently. And if it stays that way, Dallas Fuel will suffer with Fearless on Wrecking Ball. That's without a doubt. So that's what worries me about Dallas, and that's why I can't rate them any higher. I think they are meta slaves to some extent, and it worries me. Although that is something they could work out in times to come. But again, in the next cup, it did kind of demonstrate that meta slave sort of thing. In 5th, we have the Los Angeles Gladiators. Muse and Space. Space demonstrated himself to be the best Western off-tank last year. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. I think anyone above him is Korean, basically. And Space has massive pop-off potential. He's nice and consistent. He's definitely the #1 choice for American World Cup squad off-tank. Space is Space. I don't think we need to say anything more about that. Muse comes in for the first time in the league. Muse has been on mixed rosters before. He's played on the Western scene, so that's cool. He's going to slot into this Gladiator squad quite nicely. He has a lot of potential. I think this Gladiator squad, again, will live and die by Muse. Like, if he's not going to live up to its expectations, then Gladiators are going to be a 8th place team or something like that. They're going to be consistent, but they're not going to be nothing massive. If he lives up to expectations, Gladiators could pop off big time this season. So, Muse and Space, I think it's a good tank line. I really like the tank line, actually. And I think it is a lot better than most of what we see in the league. However, Muse is the question mark. Space is definitely consistent enough to keep him up, but with what Muse has behind him now as well, oh, it looks good for the Gladiators, I'm not going to lie. I like this Gladiator squad. In 4th, we have the Shanghai Dragons. So, Dragons, they may be a little low. I'm not going to lie, they may be a little low. So, Fate and Void. Void, best off-tank in the league last year. A lot of people will say that. It's between Void and Choyobin. And I don't think anyone can argue it's between those two. Void is fantastic. Comes in mighty clutch at times. He's great on the Sigma, great on the Diva, great on a Zarya. We can't really argue with Void. We just can't. He's one of the best tanks in the league. Simple as. But Fate comes in from Florida after Shanghai lose Stand 1 and Fearless. Fate, he's been consistent for Florida last year. I would say. And he's now partnered up with Moon again, and Moon tends to get the best out of Fate whenever he's with him. So I like the Fate Void tank line. It looked good in the next cup in our early indications last weekend, and probably, well, we're going to see some more this weekend. So I like Fate and Void. I do like Fate and Void, and Shanghai will be up and about that top-ish area this season, I am sure. Simply because they've got too much quality in their lineup not to be. And I think Fate and Void can really, really spearhead them forward. I think it's a good tank line, and I think Fate is one of the best replacements they could have got for Fearless in that role, to suit Shanghai Dragons anyway. Then, in 3rd, we have the Seoul Dynasty. So, Seoul Dynasty. I was worried for a long time with Seoul. We had Gesture and Marvel, and that's basically double main tank, apart from Marvel flexing to the off tank, which was okay last year, but not outstanding. But then they banging with the signing of 2U from Genji. Oh boy, brilliant signing. I really rate 2U. Now, he did give us brief glimpses last year, and yeah, he was good. He was still contracted to Genji at that point. He was two-way. And when we saw him in action for Genji in the contender scene and mainly in the gauntlet, he looked phenomenal. And then in the next cup, he also looked really, really good. Seoul have found, I think, a little bit of a gem in an off-tank here. And I think he will play off-tank all season for Seoul Dynasty. That means they can interchange Marvel and Gesture in the main tank role. Gesture, if they want to play double off-tank, they can play the Roadhog with Gesture, or even the Sigma. Gesture has a Sigma. Gesture is obviously known for his Winston play. He's also got nice Orisa. Marvel can come in for the Reinhardt when Gesture is a little bit iffy, because he can be iffy on that Reinhardt. So I like Seoul Dynasty. I think they've got quality and they've got depth in their tank lineup. And I think Seoul definitely can boast one of the best tank lines in the league right now. Number 2 is going to be a controversial one, because it's the Washington Justice. Yes. Fury, Mag, Rhea. So Fury was a massive coup for the Washington Justice to get him from Philadelphia Fusion. Fury is still one of the best off-tanks in this league, has a phenomenal diva. His Sigma has gone right up to his diva level as well, and it's really good to see. His Zarya is also mighty consistent. So I really like Fury. Really, really like Fury in this Washington Justice side. And then he's put alongside Mag. Mag comes in from Runaway. Mag was one of the hottest prospects in time to the main tank role in Korea to come into the league this season. And I think Washington Justice, again, it will depend on how Mag does. They've got dependable DPS players that they can rely on. They've got a dependable off-tank they can rely on. Mag is the question mark, but I think Mag will be fine. Mag was great for Runaway last year, and I thought Runaway looked less confident when subbing in FaZe and not having Mag in there when it was a bit of that double off-tank stuff and FaZe was their Roadhog player. So I think Mag is actually a really good signing. A Mag Fury tank line, it sounds so good. It sounds so good, and again, we're going off paper here a lot of the time, so we can't draw too many conclusions from it, but my goodness me, it sounds really good. Rhea is an outlier here. He's a great backup off-tank. I don't quite know why Washington have signed him. He's not going to start over Fury. And if he does start over Fury, then Washington are throwing, because my goodness me, you can't bench Fury. Like, I can understand Fury competing with Poco at the Philadelphia Fusion, but competing with Rhea, there is no contest. Fury's just better. Mag and Fury sounds like a massively good tank line. And I really don't think that... I think it's going to be really dependable for the Washington Justice. Possibly the most dependable and consistent part of the Justice going into 2021. But number 1, of course, is the San Francisco Shock. Because, my goodness me, like, can we argue with the tank line of the Shock? Smurf, Super, and Choi Hyobin. Arguably the best main tanks and off-tank in the league. Smurf could make a very good argument for being the best main tank, and Choi Hyobin could make a very good argument for being the best off-tank in competition with Void. My goodness me, Smurf is incredibly consistent, but not consistently good, consistently fantastic. That's what's great about Smurf. Then you have Choi Hyobin, who is not consistently good, consistently really good, and then you have Super. Super is the trump card. Bad use of words. The ace in the deck. You bring him in if you need a bit of an uplift, if you need that rally, you need that, that uplift in fortunes. You bring in Super and he changes things around. He's got a great Roadhog, he's got a great Reinhardt, and he is kind of the beating heart of the San Francisco Shock. And I was worried he wasn't going to be there this season. But no, he signed, he wants the 3-peat, and would anyone bet against San Francisco Shock getting that 3-peat right now? I don't think they would. I think we definitely have to say right now, overall, the Shock have the best tank line in the league. Can anyone challenge them going into 2021? Will be interesting to see. But in the video description below, we have all of the socials linked for Illusion and my Discord server, my Twitter, etc. Give it a follow, join it up, whatever you want to do, all those things. But I will be leaving it here for this one. Obviously, in the comments below, you'll have your own opinions and we'll have a good chat about it. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you like to give a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video. See you then.